When I see a revolutionary battle reenacted, or when I walk to a farm and see it come to life in its full 18th century splendor, I think about the wonderful people who have taken on this role of bringing history to life. That's what I love to do. And today we find out why they love to do it for a taste of history. In honor of historical reenactors everywhere, I'm going to be making mushroom toast, a venison stew, bread dumplings, and fried celery. I hold reenactors in high esteem, and I dedicate today's show to them. So today I'm here at John and William Bartram's house, and it's very befitting that I'm making mushroom toast and fried celery, since the Bartrams were well-known botanists in 18th century America. For me, it's nothing better than salinan, which is obviously in English like a brioche, like a tea bread. You can substitute it with a store-bought Texas toast or any kind of sandwich bread that you can find. What you want to do is you want to take the loaf, cut it down, and you want to be kind of generous in the portion of it, just like so. You want to make a nice square, put a little butter in a skillet, and here we go, nice and hot. I want to put the toast right into it. What happens is you want to cook the toast very slowly to kind of get the crispness on the bread. In the 18th century, we don't worry about calories, it's about flavor. But you could just toast it and do the same results. The butter and cook it in the pan just gets a tremendous amount of flavor to it. When it comes to mushroom, and the beauty about this place today where we are at John and William Bartram's gardens is they have a lot of mushrooms going here. Any kind of mushroom you want to use, for today's recipe I'm using portobello, I'm using cremini. Cremini is just a version of the button mushroom, and then I'm going to use some chanterelle. Chanterelle mushrooms grow all over in the forest around here. As a matter of fact, I was told by the historian right here in the woods at Bartram Gardens, so that morels and other mushrooms. But quite frankly, any mushroom you want to use will work for it. The beauty of the dish is the simplicity of the dish. So we got butter and shallots that are finely chopped, hand chopped. And shallots is much better than onions, they're more sweeter, but if you like to, you can also use onions too as well. Mushrooms are already chopped, I'll put them right in there. And this dish comes together relatively quickly, with the exception of making the sauce. We're going to also make sure that we watch our toast. Be nicely toasted over here. The mushrooms are sauteing behind me. So now I'm going to add on a little white wine and cream. And in the fashion of the 18th century, I'm going to make what we call a beurre manier, which is basically flour and butter equal parts together to tie up the sauce. There's a very important piece of advice when using beurre manier. You can always add, you can never take away. So one advice I have, put a little bit of time in it and then later add more. And let it simmer down a little bit to make sure I get the desired thickness. Quite frankly, it doesn't need to be too thick at all. It just needs to be nicely bound together. As you know, I'm doing the show because I love the 18th century. And this particular recipe I'm doing right now is maybe the first time I'm trying it. So if it doesn't work out, stay with me. So it's egg yolk. I put a little bit of lemon juice. Now, many recipes you find will use a reduction of white wine and shallots. For this one here, I'm making it really easy. A little bit of lemon juice, a little bit of white wine. And now I'm going to put it into the hot water. So it acts almost like a double boiler. And I want to get it, whisk it to a soft peak. Here we go. I already have on the fire, in kind of a nice temperature, not too hot, not too cold, some clarified butter. Clarified butter. Want to make sure you whisk it really good. Salt, a little bit of cayenne, a little bit of white pepper, and we're done. The last thing I have to do, the mushroom is completely cooked, completely reduced the way I want it, with a little parsley into it, and Make sure that I taste it for salt and pepper. The toast that I told you earlier, you want to cook it very, very slow. You see me there? Very slow. The slower the better. You want to get a nice crispness on the outside. Now, the mushrooms are done, so I'm going to get the spider over here. And the mushrooms, it's exactly the way I want them. Look at that. Perfect. So the mushroom goes on top of the toast. Perfecto. Get a little bit of the hollandaise on top. I have some chervil over here. And I'm sure this is one of those dishes that would have been served many times over here. It's a classic dish you find in Europe all over, called croûte aux champignons or croûte of mushrooms, depending on what mushrooms we use. But it's delicious to eat and not difficult to make. Maybe the hollandaise a little bit. We followed one group of historical reenactors as they participated in the Battle of Brandywine on the border between Delaware and Pennsylvania.
We're standing in front of the Birmingham Meetinghouse, very quiet, peaceful place today, but this was the scene of some serious action on September 11, 1777.
That's right. Two of the accounts we have come from children who were in school that day. When they heard cannon fire, they thought it was thunder in the distance. Their teachers recognized that it was a battle and sent the kids home. Washington was trying to defend Philadelphia, and this river was one of the two natural obstacles between him and the city. Washington placed his army along the creek from Buffington's Ford down the Piles Ford, a line about 5-6 miles long. The British found out about that from local people, so their strategy was based on sending Lord Cornwallis up above to cross at an unguarded ford. And when Cornwallis's force got within about 2 miles of here is when Washington realized that he had been outflanked.
So Tom, we're across the street from the Birmingham Meetinghouse. What's going on in this field here beside us?
This was the main thrust of the British attack. There were 1,200 British grenadiers. The American line was just over there about 1/4 of a mile. They could hear this British line coming from a mile away. One of the New Jersey officers said we could hear them coming, playing the Grenadiers' March, and now the battle began in earnest. Pretty soon, the main British attack swept right across the middle of these fields and engulfed this meeting house.
This is a place for quiet communion with God. All of a sudden, this great battle begins raging around. What would you imagine the scene was like turning this into a hospital then?
Oh, this would have been absolute chaos. One American account tells us the windows in this house were shattered by the cannon fire. And then after the battle, Joseph Townsend, who belonged to this meeting, tells us the doors were taken off and turned into operating tables. There's no anesthetics or antiseptic in those days. You put a soldier down, you held him down, put a belt in his mouth or gave him a bullet to chew on, and you went to work. And if they died from it, they died from it, and a lot of them did. Dead from both sides were brought to this yard, and a trench was put in back here, and that's where they were buried. We don't know how many, but it's British and American soldiers together. The Quakers have since created here a peace garden, and there's stones here with quotes from various people. Gandhi is one, and General Eisenhower is another. It's a great place for contemplation about war and peace. Thomas Paine wrote the day after this battle, "It's not a few acres that we're fighting for, it's a cause. We are going to have losses and setbacks, but we are going to defend what we never mean to part with, and that's American liberty."
Hard to believe that venison, even in the 18th century, was one of the most prized meats there was. And the reason that happened is because when the Europeans first arrived on those shores, they could hunt freely. Because in Europe, hunting was exclusively for the royalty. In a sense, the woods got overhunted, and venison became very priced and very expensive, as it is still today. So let me show you quick this recipe. There's a couple different versions you can make. One is that you marinate it, but if you have decent venison that hangs up for a while, you don't necessarily need to marinate it because venison by nature is very tender. The best piece of a venison to make a venison stew is, in my opinion, the leg. Obviously the backstrap we never use. As you can tell here, hardly no fat in venison, which just makes it beautiful. So all you want to do is take a piece of the leg. I can just go down the bone. There you go. All you want to do is just cube it. Is there any exact science to how you go cube it? Absolutely not. You can cut it either way you want it. Somewhere, when I grew up in the Black Forest, we were a little bit more meticulous, that we wanted to make sure we bone it completely. You get the nerves up, but you don't need it, because venison, as I said already, is so beautiful and so tender that you don't really have to worry about it. If you want to marinate it, the marination looks like that. Marinate overnight. It's nothing more than red wine, some herbs and some spices, just like that. The most important thing, however, is that the venison is properly aged before you do it, meaning before it gets skinned, before it comes to you, it's got to hang up for a while. So the enzymes in the meat kind of break down. My recipe includes some paprika and rosemary, that if the venison is too gamey, it kind of neutralizes. But remember also, this recipe I have does not include any starch or flour to tie it up. It really gets tied up in arrowroot or cornstarch in the end. I have a skillet getting hot in the back. I want to get this into the pan so we can start deglazing it. You want to start off with a hot pan. You want to sear it really good. Good job on stirring. You want to put onions in there, lots of it. The onion is almost like when you make a Hungarian goulash, the onion is what binds it. Most people don't realize that. The onion is what breaks it down and makes the sauce. A couple of bay leaves, a couple of sprigs of thyme, and you want to have good heat on that. You want to get the flavor out of the venison, which it's doing beautifully. Garlic, and then comes the paprika. Important to know, when the paprika goes in it, you have to stand by it, because paprika will burn real quickly. Then now, after this is all together, we're going to deglaze it with red wine. Salt and pepper. And now it's going to simmer. Now comes a crucial part on the recipe. My recipe calls for bacon, or better said, slab bacon included into it. That is cut either into a dice or to a julienne. So I'm going to put bacon into it today to be correct to the recipe. Another important step to remember when you make this dish is, when do I put the mushrooms in it? And quite frankly, there's a philosophy. If you buy expensive mushrooms like I have today, you don't necessarily want to put them into the stew. You want to show them on top. But some should go in now for the flavor. So what I'm going to do in this particular case, I'm going to take maybe a couple of portobello, a couple of chanterelles, cut them up now and throw them in the stew at this very moment. I just want to cut them big chunks, just like so. Really almost what I say, unorthodox. Just kind of chop them up. There's again no right, no wrong. Like so, boom, boom. And put them right into it. Basically, the stew is ready, except for the time that it takes now to simmer and cook. It's seasoned up, it's ready to go. What I recommend is a slow fire, once this is all in it, and let it really break down the meat gently, and you're in business. It's important to understand the role of a reenactor to bring history to life. I spoke with Scott Stevenson, a historian and a living history interpreter.
I think our nation is really founded not on a common race or religion or a national background. We're really founded on an idea and on shared history. Keeping this history alive, whether it's through visiting museums, through going out and visiting the historic sites, sometimes even putting on the clothes and trying to relive some of those moments in American history, are some of the ways we like to keep the memory of our founding period alive.
Part of it for me is the people that do this. There are lawyers, there are carpenters, there are people from any number of backgrounds. It's still the experience, but it's more often not the people that keep me coming.
You'll definitely find a sort of shared camaraderie among people who engage in this hobby. They'll sit around the campfire late at night trying to connect their experiences to something they've read, sort of like a seminar of like-minded individuals who are taking it another step beyond the classroom.
Ever since I was a kid, I've been interested in history, especially in the history of the Revolutionary War. My wife and I have been reenacting together for about 6 years. We felt inspired as children by events such as this, and we like to hopefully inspire other people to maybe read more about their history and find out more about themselves.
I've been in it for many, many years, and I'm Lieutenant George Washington's guys, 1st Continental Regiment, and I'm also the color bearer. At one time, our ancestors put a lot into what we have now. That's the neat thing about reenactment. We sleep under tents in miserable weather, but we can go home and take a shower. 100, 200 years ago, the guys who were out there on the line for us didn't have that option. So hopefully, you know, what we're doing shows people what history is about and why they should remember it.
These events and ideas from our founding period have inspired our greatest moments as a nation. They've also sustained us through some of the darkest times that we've lived through as a people. So it's very important that we stay connected to this history. Putting on the clothes and experiencing a little bit of the past this way is probably the experience of a lifetime.
In case you're wondering about the smoke, we just fought one battle. Let me tell you, muskets are flying. Everyone is stealing my food, so we had to defend it. Therefore, we had a little smoke in here. Let's finish the venison stew. As I said earlier, the mushrooms, you put some in it for flavor, but the other ones on top, because if you have expensive things, you want to show it. I'm sure this hasn't changed. All I want to do, I have a spider behind me getting hot, put a little butter in it. It's a dish I would never use schmaltz. You heard me talk about schmaltz many times, not for here. I've never seen anybody using venison schmaltz. I don't think it would taste good. Mostly like a reindeer candle. Here we go. Butter in here, so little shallots. And then all we're gonna do is so simple. Put the mushrooms in, salt and pepper, saute it, and later we're gonna put it on top of our venison. If you are a bacon lover and you wanna put extra bacon, now be a time to put some bacon on the mushroom if you like to, but you wanna stay away from that. Here we go. Get the venison. All right. So I say the mushrooms on top. And now we have some green onions that we cut on the bias, and then the most important part, usually everybody relates to any kind of game and rosemary. It just kind of wants to be together. So what I want to do is put a couple of sprigs of rosemary in there, and look at that. A very beautiful dish, served in the tradition of the 18th century. Really good. You heard me say many times, all chefs have favorites. Well, I will tell you, that next dish is one of my favorites because why? I love dumplings, and I really do love bread dumplings, and I really even better like salilan dumplings, which is a brioche. It makes it spectacular. Is it difficult to do? Not at all. Just don't be nervous and try it. What you want to do is you want to start off with a salilan or a sandwich bread or a French bread, but you got to make sure that it's a little stale. It will not work if it's like really fresh. So if it's 3 days, couple days would be good. What you want to do, you want to cut it and you want to dice it like so. What's important about it is that you have a similar dice. Do you have to take the skin off? Absolutely not for this recipe. You leave the skin right on it, just about so. And you put it into the bowl that I already have here, something like that. What makes this one unique is that our salilan has so much flavor, so it's a little better than the normal stuff. When bread is old, or stale as we call it, it needs to be reawoken. How do you awake bread? We awake the gluten by putting warm milk into it. Warm milk will bring the gluten back to life. So what you do, you want to put some milk on the fire, warm it up a little bit, and then add it into your mixture. There we go. Then what you're going to do is you're going to have onions that you saute. Now, what's important about the onions, they have to be pre-sauteed. Why? Because if you don't do them immediately, the onion have too much acidity and it will ruin your whole recipe. Then I have marjoram that goes in here, very important for this dish, which is actually an herb from the ancient Greeks. And then nutmeg. Nothing in the 18th century of quality was without nutmeg. I mean, people like George Washington and many other noble people have their own nutmeg in their pocket, as we've seen it down in Mount Vernon. So nutmeg goes in there. Then you can put in parsley and a couple of eggs. Important is the eggs. Sometimes my recipe calls for eggs and egg yolk. Really doesn't make a difference, whatever makes you, as long as you have the binder really good, so it all binds together. You want to make a good mixture out of it. You want to make sure it all comes together very good. The best way to do it is do your hands. When it's done, let it sit up for a little bit. It looks something like that when it's done. Next, you got to form it. You divide it up into the pieces. Let's say if you make it small, like a golf ball, like I have there, what you want to do, you roll it. And then what you want to do, put your hand in flour and you roll it more. You want to be very, very generous with the flour on the outside. It's the flour that coats the outside, like so, and gives it later the firmness to cook. So I'm doing a couple more. You have to make sure that you incorporate, and it would have a lot of movement, so that, here we go, so that there is no crevice open, because what happens if that's open, the dumpling will fall apart on you. In the 18th century, flour was a very expensive commodity because, remember, you had to go to the mill. There wasn't no grocery stores. You had to get it. You had to make sure it's properly stored, usually on top of a kitchen like that, so the weevils wouldn't get into it. So they took it very serious. Henceforth, this recipe would have been done with bread that was maybe overproduced. Nobody would have thrown anything away. The frugality wasn't about frugality itself. It was also the hardship it would take to make the fire and do it also. That's why. So here we go. So now I have the dumpling. When they float, they're done. Very, very simple. The finished dumplings are here. Look at that. And I will tell you, those dumplings, together with my fried celery, it will make for a absolutely spectacular, divine meal. Speaking of my celery, it's basically fritto misto. You see all kind of fried vegetables. It's not new. The 18th century had it all the time. Fried broccoli, fried leek, fried anything. So it's not a new thing that things were fried like you see in front of me. So here you have it. Our menu today made a mushroom toast, venison stew, bread dumplings and fried celery, definitely befitting of George Washington and his troops. Knowing Martha Washington as well as I know her, I'm sure she would have executed this recipe to the finest detail. And I dedicate this meal to the Continental Army that, after all, saved America.